Pastor Zack Phillips is an Arlingtonian on a mission. In addition to his leadership of the Covenant Church in town, he is also on the board of NEAT, or Neighbors Eating All Together, a volunteer organization that provides free community meals up to 10 times a year. Zack's story is one of heart and purpose, from his roots in Dallas to his studies at Harvard and Duke to the difference he is making right here in our town. He's passionate about building real relationships, supporting local families, and sparking hope and engagement through community service. Ever wonder what inspires our local leaders or how faith and service come together in Arlington? Join us for the following conversation as Zack opens up about his own journey, his hopes for our community, and what motivates him day in and day out. Hey there, everybody. I'm James Milan, and with that introduction, I want us to find out more about Zack Phillips' journey and current work, etc. So, Zack, first of all, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
It is really great to have you in, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, truly am. You know, we mentioned before we went on air, it has been a somewhat long and winding road for you in general, from Dallas through a bunch of stops to here, lots of things going on. And I'd love to spend the first part of the conversation just finding out more about what was happening for you as you made at various decision points in your life, and again, ending up with arriving in Arlington.
Yeah, so I grew up in Dallas, like you said, and I came here for college at age 18. And unlike...
Well, let me even just interrupt you and say, came here to college at age 18. That's not typical.
No, right.
You know, people who grow up in Dallas don't that often decide to come to Boston.
Come to New England, right.
Right. How did that happen? Do you remember?
Well, I applied to a bunch of different schools. I was, one of these classic hardworking, overachieving, smart kids, and I wanted to go to a great school, and I got into Harvard. My mom and I came to visit, and we sat in Bertucci's in Harvard Square, and it started snowing, and I thought, this is where I need to come to school.
That's great.
So that's kind of how I ended up in some ways at Harvard.
Might have been your fondest experience of snow ever.
One of them, yeah, for sure,
Yeah, because I'm sure after 4 years here, you might have been like, okay, I've had enough snow.
Well, actually, that first winter, so when I came up here from Texas, everyone said, had all of these, Yankees are rude, and it's horrible weather, and it's Arctic, and I took all of it somewhat with a grain of salt, and then that winter, it was 95, 96, was the most snow the Boston area had on record until something like 2015. Mm-hmm. And so I came here as an 18-year-old and it snowed a foot every day, it seemed. So it was trial by fire or by snow, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So nonetheless, did not dampen, so to speak, your enthusiasm, I imagine. But yeah, so sorry, I interrupted you. You made it, you came here, went to school.
Yeah, and unlike probably 99% of Texans, I found this to be more at home than I ever found Texas. Even within like a month or two, I would get on the Red Line, and there's just a bunch of people buried in their newspapers with their Red Sox hats, and I felt like this place has never quite gotten over their Mayflower experience. They're all kind of like huddled together, griping together in the cold, and that's kind of who I am. So.
I did not think that's how that sentence was going to end. I
loved it. I loved it. So I stayed here. I went for a year after college to New York and did a stint as a paralegal there. And then I came back and was a paralegal here for a year. And then I went to law school back here at Harvard as well. Met my wife.
What prompted that? Did you have that idea when you first went to undergrad? Eventually I'd like to do this. Was that a revelation after?
I went for the worst possible reason, which, in hindsight, having been out 20 years now and reunions and friends, these are the people that tend not to last or do very well. I was just clueless. And I was early 20s, and there was this pressure and the weight on the world. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You need to know now. And so I thought something like, well, I'm good at writing, and I don't like injustice. And, it kind of sort of vaguely matches my skill sets. And I didn't have more to it than that. So I was just kind of muddling through.
Well, I will just share very briefly with you that is not too dissimilar from my own story.
You were saying you went to law school.
I went to law school for the reasons being I had been out, I had gone to graduate school in a PhD program, didn't work out, worked for a few years, felt my mind was kind of atrophying, wanted something more relevant than the comparative literature I'd studied for my graduate degree, and wanted something more relevant and something hard, something rigorous that would get my brain going again. And those were the reasons why I decided on law school, which again is not, the kind of focus and directionality that is going to make for more than muddling a lot of the time through that experience.
We have very similar experiences because I was an English major, and I was applying to grad programs in English, PhD programs in English at the same time as law school. And I went and visited one that I got into, and I came home with just this empty feeling in my stomach. And I thought, I love writing, I love reading, but I don't want to write about water metaphors in Middlemarch for the rest of my life.
Well, I was in this PhD program for a year and a half, and I can tell you made the right decision.
Well, I didn't last long in law, though, so there's that.
Me neither. I lasted 0. I ended up as moving here from law school. I went to the law school in California, moved here, got married, and then started looking for a job as a teacher, as a recent law school graduate.
You are one of the few people I've ever met that lasted a shorter amount of time than I did. I lasted 10 months.
There you go.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, long digression. Let us get back on track. So you went from, undergrad, little paralegal work, go to law school. Then you're faced with the question of, okay, what are you going to do? 10 months is what did you start on a path in a particular branch of the law?
I was doing finance and real estate. Because I went to Harvard, the default position, the water that you swim in that you never learn to question, is you're going to go to big law, huge firm, as much money and prestige as possible, as many hours as possible. And I got married right after law school and discovered that I did not really want to work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week in finance. So I lasted 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, this is very different from where your story is going to end up, so let's keep going.
It is, yep. So I worked for a couple years for Harvard Business School doing research, and then I went back to school at Duke Divinity School for seminary for 2 years. It was an academic degree, not the 3-year MDiv, it was a 2-year Master of Theological Studies. I knew I wanted to do an academic type career. So I finished that. I spent a year in my in-laws' basement in Hawaii, and I was a barista. And then I came back and did a PhD at the same place at Duke in New Testament. I had to learn 4 languages. So it took a while to do that and the dissertation. And then,
but it's a guaranteed job after that, right?
Yeah, of course, which is where the story's going to go. I had no job. I had no job prospects, and I was finishing up. And so my wife and I chose geography. We had 2 young boys. We didn't know what to do, where to apply, where we would be, and we both loved the New England, Greater Boston area. She went to BU. We lived here for years before we went back to North Carolina, and so we came back here and have been here ever since 2017.
So came back here without necessarily knowing what you guys were going to do here?
Yeah,
or?
Neither one of us had a job.
Is that right?
Just chose the place.
That is what we call a leap of faith, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think one thing that people might be, especially if they tuned in after the introduction, they might be a bit confused about, okay, how does a guy who is, has had jobs as varied as paralegal and barista, who, goes to Harvard, studies English, goes to law school, how does all that end up with in a world that is the world of faith, the world of because I'm sure that was a theme that runs through most of your life.
Sure.
But it wasn't on the surface in terms of what you were doing, it sounds like.
It was on the surface, but not in terms of a job. So, I had been a Christian since I was 13 years old. Faith was always central to how I spent a lot of my time, communities, friendships, ministries throughout college and law school. So it was always there. It became my career, at least would-be career academically, because I was in my third year at law school. We had to write a senior thesis, and I chose to write on basically the Sermon on the Mount and litigation. I think I called it a Christian perspective on litigation. And I call that my second conversion to Christian faith, because I realized that my experience of faith was very real and very deep, but it was also very narrow. And I learned a lot about the history of the church and about different traditions and different denominations and different folks who had argued different things about how to interpret this. And that opened my eyes to how big and broad and wide is the Christian faith and tradition. So that kind of launched my academic career.
Gotcha. And if I can just, I want to be able to move forward into the work that you're doing here and being in Arlington and talking about our lovely town, which is really the focus of the largest focus of the interview. But I'm just curious, there's that word curious, I'm just curious about, you said that you, in terms of getting your PhD down at Duke, you needed to get a good grasp on 4 languages.
Yeah.
I assume that is in order to be able to read sources in their original, is that right? And what 4 languages was that?
Ancient Greek for the New Testament, ancient Hebrew for the Old Testament, German and French for modern day commentary and scholarship on those.
Wow. So ancient Greek, ancient Hebrew, low-hanging fruit, right? No problem.
Right. No problem. My Hebrew exam was the only exam I ever failed in my life. I had to retake that one.
Yep. Well, I think that's relatively understandable.
Yeah, that one was hard.
All right. So you moved to Boston, not quite sure what you're going to do. How does that path of yours kind of wend its way to Arlington?
We had friends who had purchased a house in Arlington that they wanted to rent. And they told us that at the same time we were looking to move back to this area. So we ended up in this town, basically in that way.
Okay.
And have been here for the last 9 years.
So somewhat arbitrary.
Yeah.
In terms of the entry into Arlington.
We wanted greater Boston area and ended up in Arlington. That was somewhat arbitrary.
Has it continued to be the case? Or are you just basically renting that same house over all this time?
Yeah, we just stayed, and our kids are going through the Arlington School District. My oldest is about to graduate from Arlington High.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
About to graduate as in heading off to college? How was that process?
That's a whole long conversation of itself. He's going to go to UMass Amherst in the fall.
Okay, good for him and good for you.
Yep.
Slightly less extortionary than certain of the tuitions that one could pay.
Cost was a big factor.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah.
So, over these 9 years, it has, I'd really want to focus now not only on the work that you do in the church that you're a pastor for, that's Covenant Church, and then with Operation Neat. But let's start with just kind of, what was your impression of Arlington at the time that you moved in? Obviously, you moved because it worked, not because there was anything about the community that drew you necessarily.
Right.
But I like those fresh eyes to ask, what was your sense, if you can remember, of the town when you got here? And, how have things progressed since then?
The honest answer is I didn't really have much of an impression. And I think that's probably common, right? I was trying to put bread on the table. I was still teaching. I was teaching LSAT to would-be law students. I was trying to cobble together as many hours as I could. My wife had a demanding job. We had 2 young children. So, you're just kind of locked in and your focus is really narrow. And it doesn't extend too far beyond your house, the grocery store. It took me years to form an impression of Arlington.
Well, I appreciate your candor, number one, and again, another parallel in our lives, because as I mentioned to you, I was a teacher for many years, and that was the main focus of and we also were raising young children, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. And the last 10, 12 years here at ACMi, major eye-opening for me about the community that we live in. You've had your own path to understanding that community because, again, tell us about kind of getting involved with Covenant and then how you came to be, in fact, the main man.
Yeah, we moved here in 2017. A few weeks after we moved, a friend of a friend invited me to attend Covenant Church, and it was a shock in a good and bad way. I had never been to a small church. I'd always been to very large churches.
Yes, I lived in Dallas for a year. I remember some very large churches, I've got to say.
Exactly. And I walked in on a Sunday morning and there were 35 people. And it was a shock, but it was at the same time this feeling of this is kind of, in some inchoate sense, how I always thought church should be. And similar to coming here and feeling instantly at home in New England more than I did in Texas, I had the same exact feeling going to a really small church like Covenant. There is a culture of participation. There's no anonymity. It's, everyone's all in. I had a friend at the time whose father had been a pastor for many years of a small church, and I asked him about attending a small church, and he said, what you need to know is that if you go to a small church and you leave, they will be sad. And I thought
they will notice.
And they will notice and they will be sad. And I thought that's the kind of place I want to go to church. So we started attending, and then the pastor who'd been there for 21, 22 years announced he was retiring, and we were devastated. There was a search committee, and because I had the background and credentials that I did, they asked me if I would consider being a candidate. I said no, because I saw myself more as a lawyer type than a pastor type. There's a lot to that, but the long and short of it is I did end up having 7 hours of interviews, 4 with our search committee and 3 with our elders. And unlike any other interview under the sun, I tried not to get the job.
An interesting approach.
I wanted to share all of my questions, doubts, potential heresies, problems, personality shortcomings, all of the reasons why I should not do this. And at the end of that time, they said, you were exactly the person we were looking for. Because we want someone that is not going to be above us, but that's going to walk alongside us authentically. And I said, I can do that. And that was almost 8 years ago. So I've been there as pastor about 7.5 years.
That's a wonderful story. That really is. It's from both ends. Because again, from your perspective, how often do you get to, go into a job interview process in which you don't feel so tied to the outcome that you can really just bring all of your doubts, your ambivalence, or whatever to it.
It was fantastic.
So that's really cool. And then from their perspective, I get that. I do get that, especially for a small congregation. What a lovely thing to think, this guy deserves to be leading this parish or this congregation in certain ways. By the same token, like you said, walking alongside and just struggling with the same things and asking the same kinds of questions and therefore validating those questions, I would think.
Yeah, and it's been sort of the nature in some ways of my ministry, at least as I do sermons every week. There's a question, what is a sermon? Why do we do it? And people answer that in different ways. And my own answer over time has evolved to be, I'm not really necessarily teaching you something. I am bringing to you my experience wrestling with this text. And I'm going to offer that to you, and I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to let you wrestle with me. And for better or worse, that's how I preach most of my sermons. So it's been a fantastic fit for congregation and for me.
Yeah, who'd have thunk, right? You figured you weren't going to be, this wasn't going to be the right thing for you. Well, there you go. Lesson unto itself. All right, time is a flying, as I expected it would be. So let's move right through to Operation NEAT, which we hopefully our audience is familiar with, because we have featured this actually tremendous organization in various ways in our programming in recent times. And just to remind everybody, well, why don't you actually?
Yeah,
why
sure.
don't I let you?
So NEAT stands for Neighbors Eating All Together. It's a group that I think started in 2017. I said I think because I wasn't part of the starting of it. I don't remember how I learned of it, but I learned of it somehow, I think through a church member. And then pre-pandemic, I went with that church member to the basement of St. John's Episcopal Church to one of their dinners, and I thought it was fantastic. And then it shut down, as the rest of the world did. So somehow it stuck in my mind. And a few years later, I think 2 years, I think it was end of 2022, I emailed and reached out to the leadership. And I said, when are you guys going to start up again? And they said, we don't know if we are. And I said, well, can we have coffee and talk about it? So we met at Cafe Nero in Arlington Center, a couple of the folks that run the leadership and myself. And they said, well, it's, we've lost momentum. We've lost our volunteers. We've lost the relationships we have. Booting up is kind of daunting. Maybe we will prepare food and give it to folks in Boston or something. And I said, no, it has to be the community meal. I said, I will help. I'm a pastor of a church, I'll bring volunteers and I'll help you I'll restart this. And so we restarted it. I think that was March 2023. And I joined the board. And the first 6 months or so, I think, or 4 months, it was snowed or rained out every time but one. And we still had it. But we had, I think the first time we had it in March, we had 6 guests.
Wow.
And we had 12 guests. Oh, it's going to grow exponentially? No. And then we had 10 guests. And so, there was a lot of doubt, a lot of belief, a lot of enthusiasm, but a lot of, is this going to become a thing? And that was the first few months. Like I said, if that was March, we had our barbecue outdoors at Thompson School that summer. And over 400 people showed up. And that really launched the momentum. And now at any given meal, we plan for about 200, 225, and usually hit about that. So it's really become an encouraging part of Arlington.
Yeah, we have covered several of those meals, and you're filling the high school cafeteria. There's people of all ages interacting with each other. It is a truly inspiring. Don't want to in some way diminish it by using a word like inspiring, which is used in out of context a certain amount of time. Inspiring, I mean literally. To see that happening in the community, especially also to talk with organizers and understand, as you so well do, I'm sure, that it is not just the food. It is by no means just the food.
Absolutely.
But instead, this is a deliberate effort to combat isolation, to give people a reason to get out of their, their apartment or whatever, and come together as a community. So just talk about that a little bit,
Yeah, so it may still even be on our website, I'm not sure. I mean, when I started, the way that we described NEAT, we usually talked about trying to reach people that had food insecurity or loneliness and isolation. I mean, we had sort of groups we were hoping to be a part of helping in the community. And What I've loved maybe the most about NEAT is how that has morphed over time. And what I mean by that is certainly, it's still our hope that we will meet the needs of folks in those groups. But, most nonprofits or ministries or whatnot, there is kind of a strange power dynamic of the givers and the receivers.
Right.
The rich and the poor, the people who are receiving services, the people who are volunteering for services.
The looming shadow of charity.
Exactly.
Of the idea of charity.
Exactly. And what's been amazing about NEAT is by the very structure of it, it gets rid of that. Because you're sitting at a table and you don't know who's rich and poor. You don't know who has food insecurity and who doesn't. You don't know who's there because this is the only conversation they'll have all week and who's there after having had conversations all day. And so we've talked about that at length, that it's just wonderful that our mission has come to be such that it's reaching all sorts of people in all sorts of ways in a way that you can't do except at a table.
Yeah, so as that has happened, what have you learned, if anything, through the opportunities, through the challenges, et cetera, of dealing with Arlingtonians, both those who are there because the meal is going to be a helpful thing, and those who are there for entirely other reasons. What can you share with us about this community of ours?
Yeah, there are a lot of enthusiastic volunteers. There are a lot of people with a lot of compassion and a lot of desire to build community. We have a huge volunteer list. I think now when I send out the emails, I'm the volunteer coordinator. It goes to about 200 people, and that grows seemingly with every meal as we have a sign-up sheet and people check if they want to volunteer. I have found both in my ministry with our church and in my work with NEAT that the primary impediment with folks is not their heart, and it's not their will, and it's not their mind. You have a lot of people that want to do good. They just don't have the imagination for what form that can take. When I first started at Covenant Church, I scheduled a meeting with a town official. I won't say who or what department, but it was someone who I thought, this person will have their pulse on the needs of the town. And I said, I'm pastor, newly installed at this church. We're small, but we're enthusiastic about helping our community. What could we do? Given the needs and the profile, what could we start? And she said, I don't know. And I don't judge her for that. I mean, it is a hard thing to have the imagination outside of what you've already experienced as to what it might look like to devote your energy, to give your time and your heart. So NEAT has been great in that it's given people a vision for something that they could do with their energy and their compassion.
It's not, I couldn't agree with you more, number one. Number two, I would say it goes even further than that, because it's not only giving them a vision of what they could do, it's giving them a simple thing that they can do and that they're going to feel really good about afterwards. Not simply because they did something good, but because the experience itself, I've been to NEAT meals, the experience itself is an uplifting experience.
Yeah,
it's hard to leave there without thinking, that was great and I want to do it again.
Yeah. They, we have volunteer tasks that accommodate introverts and extroverts and people that can lift, people that can't lift. But one thing, we always say is have fun, meet new people, make sure you eat as part of the experience. So it is a way that you serve, but unlike some serving opportunities, it's a really tangible sort of immediate reward, which is another great thing about how we do it.
So I just want to say tangentially, we've blown through the time that we had allotted, but we're just going to keep talking because we'll just make this a slightly longer program.
That works.
The folks that you were just referring to, which is people who, are volunteering there, that you've clearly hit a chord, because as you say, that number just keeps growing organically each time you're sending emails out. Does that make you, does the fact that you are 200 plus volunteers, people interested in this, is that making you rescale your ambitions going forward for the program at all? Is that having any effect, or are you just feeling like, great, we're in a great situation here and we can just keep this rolling for a while?
That is a question we will have to figure out probably. We've talked about that very preliminarily as a board. And my sense is probably different leaders have different views on that. I just lauded the beauty of a small church community. And that's who I am as a pastor and what I believe in. I would find it very difficult to work on a large staff at a large church for all sorts of reasons, because the dynamics are different. And so we may have to cross that bridge. I don't know. At some point,
it's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem to have. We haven't really quite gotten there yet. But at some point, we'll have to have a hard look in the mirror and say, well, once we achieve a certain scale and move to the next scale, dynamics change. And, we haven't had to figure that out yet. We've just been growing and busting at the seams and enjoying the abundance so far.
Great. And the success, clear success of the program, at least since that Thompson School. I remember talking to a couple of founders of Operation NEAT, and they pointed very much to that Thompson School gathering of 400, I think they even called 500 people, where they're expecting maybe, half or less than that, et cetera, that was the kind of start of this big ball rolling in a sense. But what I am curious about is, do you feel like the food and food insecurity situation here in Arlington is one that we are kind of, through things like Operation NEAT and Arlington Eats, of course. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Food Link and Arlington Eats and the other organizations. I imagine so. Where do you feel like we are at? And with what insight you guys do have, because you're doing this work, into food insecurity here in Arlington, which is something that is a major community value to address this clearly. But I don't know if people understand where we're at, either that the situation is more dire than they were thinking, or what.
It was a few years ago. You know how time goes. It may have been 2, it may have been 10, I don't remember, but more than a year ago, I had a church member. We do a thing on Sundays called corporate prayer. And someone is assigned or volunteers that week to spend time figuring out what they should bring to the congregation and share. We should pray about this together. And one week, one of our church members wanted to pray about, it was either Arlington Eats or food insecurity. And he stood up and he had done some research that week, and he gave a presentation. And the figure was astounding to me. I looked it up recently on the Arlington Eats website, and they said, according to the Greater Boston Food Bank data, approximately 1 in 5 Arlington residents is at risk of food insecurity. And Arlington's an interesting place, as we're starting to delve into. You can easily drive through or walk through huge swaths of Arlington and have no idea that the figure would be that high. And so, unlike some places, our need is often invisible. Even more so in some ways with the loneliness, which is another big thing that we try to address. So that's one of the real challenges, I think, of living in Arlington, is that you don't walk outside and contrast it to a place like Harvard Square, where you can see a lot of need. You can see homelessness. You can see need in front of you. Our need is often invisible.
Absolutely. The people who will stand in a prominent street, on a prominent street corner with a sign. I just saw just earlier today somebody at Trader Joe's, and I realized I have not seen that.
Right.
A person doing that there. I can't even remember the last time. So I think you're very much right, because that does not mean, and people should understand,
Exactly.
by no means does that mean that there are not a lot of people who could be.
Exactly.
But it is a town and a culture in which I think it takes even an extra oomph of either desperation or temerity or whatever it is to be able to do that here.
It's you have to be really intentional, I think, if you really want to get to know a place. And so, I've met with folks repeatedly from Housing Corp of Arlington, Arlington Housing Authority, different groups that do help people in town. I pick their brain and I've asked them, and what are facilities, and what are you building, and what are you doing? And I ended up, what was most helpful actually, was talking to a friend who's lived lived here their whole life. And I said, tell me about the different neighborhoods. Tell me about the history. Tell me where the school used to be. Tell me, and like I said, because most of us have our head down just trying to get by, putting food on the table, raising our kids, we don't feel like we have any time to invest to develop the deep knowledge of a place. And I think that's another wonderful thing about organizations like NEAT, is you can get an email, you can say, hey, there's 4 hours on a Saturday, and I can go and I can have a good time, I can eat, I can volunteer, and I can actually meet my neighbors. And so that's been a wonderful feature, is helping bring people together to learn more about where they live.
Another aspect of what our co-producer, Michael Armanius, calls Arlington as a learning town. That is an opportunity. An Operation NEAT meal, community meal, is actually an opportunity to continue that lifelong learning process that Michael is always talking about and identifying in places around Arlington.
I mean, the people that you may sit with may open up a whole new vantage point on the town that you live in.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, and we'll wrap things up shortly, but I just am curious about Covenant, about the church, and how do you see your small congregation fitting in to the community of Arlington? And are you working to build kind of collaborations with other organizations, et cetera?
We are, and I'm glad you asked that. It's a question you very much cannot take for granted when it comes to church life. A few years ago, I became really interested in something called, and this is across different denominations and churches, the New Parish Movement. And the idea is that most churches, maybe not most, many churches don't really have a sense of place. And there are interesting sort of intellectual social histories that I've read of this that go back 80 or 100 years with the rise of the automobile, and more, and all of a sudden, most people have cars, and the rise of the suburbs, and all of a sudden people drive long distances to work, they drive long distances to the gym or to where their kids go to school, and driving long distances becomes the norm at around the same time when advertising becomes a bigger feature of our life, and consumerism becomes a bigger and bigger feature of our life. So what that means for a lot of churches in America is you'll drive past 10 churches to get to the 11th that meets your needs, that you like the music, you like the preaching, and it may be 4 towns over. And the upshot is a lot of churches don't have a sense of place at all.
As in, they're not a community center for their surrounding area.
Right. And as I have become more interested in this New Parish Movement and thinking through that, our church members and leadership have as well. And it's looked like what you're describing, trying to work with and get to know other organizations. I mean, when you're 30 people, you're not going to start a giant, although with NEAT, we've started a fairly large thing with a small number of people. But we've done a number of things with Housing Corp of Arlington, We hosted a big event when they had a ribbon cutting ceremony
at the Drake Village.
It was actually the place they built on, it's called Downing Square Broadway Initiative, right across the street from our church, and they needed a venue, and we hosted a bunch of people. We hosted a welcome meal for that group. We've hosted their board meetings. Similarly, we have all our NEAT board meetings at Covenant. We have a big supply closet that we've donated to NEAT. So we're trying to learn more about the community and develop partnerships with groups in town.
That is a wonderful thing to hear, and a never-ending task in a sense, just to continue to build the tendrils out into all the different places in our community that we can get to. As you can tell, we at ACMi have a similar kind of thing, a similar kind of aspiration going on. Yeah. So perhaps we'll figure out again how to collaborate some more between your institution and ours.
Yeah, one of the, I bet we would have a lot of similar struggles and stories. My existential problem when I go to bed at night, leading a church of 30 people is, but we're not a church of 300, but we're not a church of 3,000, but there is such a dominant ethos of quick, instant growth in our society that is what we consider successful. And a patient, long process of staying the course, getting to know your community person by person over a period of years or decades is not as visible. It's not a story that's told often. It's not as valued for all sorts of reasons. And it's an important thing for probably most people to do.
Amen to that. And with that, we will conclude this conversation. I knew it was going to be a good one. I knew I was going to be really engaged by it, and I can promise you that was the case. Awesome. I really appreciate
Thank you so much,
talking
James.
to you. Very thoughtful, very insightful, and also just a little inspirational. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Zack Phillips. He is many, many things, including the pastor of Covenant Church here in Arlington. And we really appreciate him spending this time with us. Also appreciate you being here, as always. So thanks for that. I'm James Milan, and we will see you next time.